Let's imagine this. You wake up one morning feeling pretty normal. Maybe you had a weird dream about being chased by alligators while playing charades, but that doesn't seem to have any bearing on your otherwise average day. You make some breakfast, watch the news, maybe spend some time on social media, and then something strange happens. You try to say something, but no sound comes out. You try again, but all you hear is a silent squeak. Your voice, the thing that has been with you for years, that has let you express yourself and communicate with others, has suddenly disappeared. If this happened to you, you would probably be pretty scared. Not only would you not be able to talk to anyone, but you wouldn't be able to yell for help or warn others of danger. In fact, you would basically become invisible to everyone around you, a silent ghost wandering among the living. It's an extremely disturbing thought, but it is also the terrifying premise of one of the most popular horror games ever made, Silent Hill. Now in Silent Hill, the protagonist's voice disappears because of a curse placed on the town by a mysterious cult. But what if this were to happen in real life? What if one day you woke up and nobody could hear you? Would you be able to survive? Well, yes, but only just. The ability to speak is incredibly useful, but surprisingly, it is not strictly necessary for survival. On average, humans can go about 40 days without food and 3 days without water, but only around 72 hours without sleep. And while getting your full 8 hours every night might seem like a long time without talking, it's definitely doable. But what about after that point? Fortunately, things get much more difficult. After about a week without sleep, you will experience hallucinations, paranoia, and delusions. You'll also be too exhausted to do anything, so you won't be able to forage for food or find water, meaning that you will eventually starve and die. So unless you live close to a grocery store, you will not last very long at all without your voice. The good news is that losing your voice doesn't mean that you are completely defenseless. In fact, there are several ways that you could defend yourself, even if you couldn't say a word. The first is to write down what you want to say. This requires a pen and paper, of course, but once you have them, you should be able to communicate effectively. The only problem is that this is only really an option if you are trying to communicate with someone who can read. So if you meet someone who can't read, like a young child, you will need another way to communicate. Luckily, there are plenty of other options. For example, you could use sign language, which is actually something that the deaf community has been doing for centuries. In fact, there are many different types of sign languages used around the world, each of which has its own unique grammar and syntax. American Sign Language, for example, is completely different from British Sign Language. However, since there are many different types of sign languages, you may need to travel far and wide to find someone who can understand yours. Fortunately, there is a universal sign language that everyone in the world understands, the language of math. Every number is a universal sign, so you could write them down to communicate with anyone. This might take a little bit longer than speaking, of course, but it's reliable and most importantly, everyone understands it. That is, as long as you are communicating with someone that is reasonably intelligent. Of course, there are still people who don't understand math, so you will need another trick up your sleeve. Okay, luckily. There's another form of nonverbal communication that is arguably more important than language: body language. Basically, humans can convey a lot of information without saying a word, such as their emotional state or their intent. This is why body language is so important in fields such as sales, marketing, and customer service. If you know how to use body language properly, you can convey confidence, trustworthiness, and friendliness without saying a word. However, body language is a pretty complicated subject. There are dozens of micro-expressions, gestures, and postures that can convey a huge range of emotions and intents. So learning how to use it effectively would require a great deal of study. But if you did learn how to use body language correctly, it could save your life. So far, we've discussed lots of different ways to communicate, but what if you need to defend yourself against an attacker? In that case, you will need to learn a new fighting style, one that relies entirely on body language and martial arts. Obviously, this is going to be pretty difficult to learn from scratch, but luckily, you don't need to. There are plenty of videos online teaching you how to fight without making a sound. In fact, there's a whole genre of fighting videos that are based entirely on nonverbal cues. For example, there are tons of videos teaching you how to fight back against common wrestling moves, which is extremely helpful considering that a lot of fighting happens on the ground. There are also tons of videos teaching you how to defend yourself against attacks that happen from behind, such as a chokeslam or a knee to the back of the head. While these techniques may not be as effective as having a loud voice, they may be enough to save your life. However, there is one extremely effective way to defend yourself that does not require any special training. All you need is some anger. It is well documented that people who are angry are much more likely to win fights, especially against bigger, stronger opponents. Now, obviously, getting angry isn't exactly a battle strategy, but it may be enough to save your life. However, none of these methods work if your attacker is deaf. After all, if he can't hear you, then writing something down or signing to him isn't going to do much. Luckily, there are still a few tricks left. For example, there are many different hand gestures that can provoke a negative reaction, such as flipping someone off or giving them the middle finger. These gestures are not only insulting, but they also serve as a warning. Essentially, you are telling the person that you are ready to fight and that they should back off. However, if your attacker is really angry, then he may not listen to reason or simple warnings. In that case, you will need to resort to something more drastic, like pretending to have a weapon. After all, most people are not willing to attack someone who has a knife, gun, or bat. So if you make a fist pretend that it's a weapon, the attacker may back off. As you can see, there are still plenty of ways to defend yourself, even if you can't make a sound. So if one day you wake up and notice that you've lost your voice, don't panic. Stay calm, follow the tips above, and you should be able to survive. Check out what would happen to your body if you never slept again. Or watch what would happen if you couldn't feel pain.